August 6, 1945. The morning air above Hiroshima was calm, almost peaceful, but beneath that calm lay a terror no one could imagine. In the streets, children laughed as they chased each other through narrow alleys. Mothers called their sons to breakfast. Fathers checked the locks on factory gates. Nobody knew that in mere moments their lives would be shattered beyond recognition. Inside the cockpit of the B-29 bomber Enola Gay, Colonel Paul Tibbets gripped the controls, acutely aware that what he carried would change history forever. He looked down at the city sprawled below, thousands of lives unaware of the fate descending from the sky. He felt a mix of duty, fear, and a strange, haunting heaviness because he knew that this was not just a military operation. It was the dawn of a new, terrifying era. Thousands of miles away in Tokyo, the Japanese High Command convened in a dimly lit room, unaware that the first reports of Hiroshima's destruction were already reaching them in fragments. War Minister Korochika Inami paced nervously. Maps were strewn across the table, marked with red pins showing lost islands, shattered battalions, and retreating armies. "If they reach Honshu, the empire is finished," he muttered. His voice was low yet tense. Other generals remained silent, the weight of fear pressing upon them. Then the first official report arrived. A city obliterated in an instant. The generals froze. Disbelief rippled through the room. "It cannot be real," one officer whispered, staring at the trembling messenger. But photographs and eyewitness accounts confirmed the impossible. Hiroshima had been erased in a flash of blinding light. Its streets, homes, and people vanished in seconds. The emperor's advisors gathered urgently, their faces pale, their hands shaking. They realized that Japan faced a weapon unlike anything in history. A single bomb dropped from the sky had destroyed everything in its path. It was not just a military strike, it was a statement. America could reach anywhere, annihilate anything, and change the course of humanity with a single act. In Hiroshima, survivors would later recount the horror with words that could scarcely capture the reality. Mothers searching for children who had vanished. Lovers holding each other amidst ruins, screaming for lives that were no longer there. Soldiers trained to fight and die with honor were powerless. The air itself had turned into fire, the ground into molten ash. Humanity, they realized, was fragile in a way no one had truly understood until now. And in Tokyo, as the High Command absorbed the truth, a chilling realization took hold. The war they had fought with strategy, bravery, and devotion had suddenly become meaningless. America's power was no longer an abstract force. It was tangible, immediate, and terrifying. The atomic bomb had redefined the rules of war, leaving Japan with a choice they had never imagined having to make: fight a hopeless war or surrender to a power beyond comprehension. The sun had barely risen over Hiroshima when the city became unrecognizable. Buildings that had once stood proudly were flattened or melted into blackened skeletons. Streets twisted like molten rivers, their familiar paths erased. Survivors stumbled through the ruins, their faces scorched, clothes tattered, clutching loved ones who were no longer there. Children cried out for parents who would never answer. Mothers ran aimlessly, carrying babies whose cries were drowned in the overwhelming roar of fire and collapse. Among the chaos, a young man named Hiroshi searched for his sister. He had left home that morning to deliver a message from his father, a factory worker, and now the world around him was unrecognizable. Smoke and heat seared his lungs, ash filled his hair, and every step brought him closer to people whose bodies had disappeared in a single, blinding flash. Where is everyone?" he whispered, his voice trembling, swallowed by the overwhelming silence that followed the blast. In Tokyo, the Japanese High Command was in a state of shock. Reports from Hiroshima arrived piecemeal, fragmented and horrifying. A city had been wiped out in moments. Tens of thousands were dead. The scale of destruction defied all comprehension. Generals stared at the messages, unable to fully process what they saw. War Minister Korochika Inami gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. "We have underestimated them," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. terribly, terribly underestimated. The room buzzed with tension. Some officers urged immediate retaliation. Others whispered that any resistance would be meaningless. The emperor's advisors debated surrender versus honor. But the stark truth was unavoidable. Japan faced a weapon beyond any defense, beyond any imagination. In Hiroshima, the human toll was unfathomable. Survivors wandered amidst fires that continued to burn long after the explosion, searching for anyone, anything that could offer hope. Entire families had vanished. Streets that were once alive with laughter and chatter were now filled with screams and desperate cries. Hospitals were overwhelmed with the wounded, burns so severe they could barely be touched, radiation sickness that no medicine could cure, and the psychological trauma of witnessing everything vanish in an instant. Meanwhile, Tokyo's leaders struggled to grasp the nature of the weapon. "It is not conventional," one general said grimly. This is something entirely new. We cannot fight it." Every map they consulted, every plan they drafted suddenly seemed meaningless. Cities, armies, and strategies, the pillars of Japan's war effort, had been rendered irrelevant in a single flash of light. Even the emperor, distant from the battlefield, felt the weight of this new reality. His advisors spoke of honor, of tradition, of sacrifice, but the destruction of Hiroshima left him with no illusions. Japan could no longer fight as it had before. The atomic bomb had rewritten the rules of war. Courage alone could not withstand this power. Back in the ruins, Hiroshi finally found the remnants of his sister's home. His parents were gone, his sister nowhere to be found. He sank to the ground, the heat of the fire searing his skin, and for the first time, truly understood the fragility of life. Around him the city smoldered, a terrifying monument to human ingenuity and human suffering. The High Command continued their deliberations, but a sense of urgency and desperation grew with each hour. Some officers spoke of surrender. Others feared the dishonor it would bring. Every moment spent debating was another hour in which more cities could be destroyed. Japan faced a new kind of war, one in which traditional measures, soldiers, weapons, fortifications were powerless. As night fell over Tokyo, the full impact of Hiroshima became undeniable. Ordinary citizens, hearing fragmented reports over the radio, trembled in their homes. Families held each other tightly, unsure if the same fate awaited them. The generals, once confident in their ability to resist, realized they were facing a force that could strike anywhere, anytime, with a speed and power previously unimaginable. The day ended with no easy answers, only grim understanding. Hiroshima lay in ashes. Tens of thousands of lives were gone. The Japanese High Command had witnessed the impossible. America had not simply attacked a city. It had demonstrated absolute power, a power that could obliterate civilization in a way no one had dared to imagine. And deep inside the hearts of the leaders, a chilling thought began to take hold. The war they had fought for years, the sacrifices demanded from soldiers and civilians, the honor of their nation, all of it was at the mercy of a weapon they could not comprehend or stop. The atomic bomb had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same. August 7th, 1945. The morning sun rose over Tokyo, but the city was anything but calm. Inside the Imperial Palace, the Japanese High Command gathered once again. Faces were pale, eyes hollow, voices tight with tension. Maps of the Pacific, once a tool of strategy, now seemed like reminders of defeat. Islands lost, cities destroyed, battalions decimated. Each pin on the map was a testament to a war slipping beyond their control. War Minister Kurachika Anami stood at the head of the table, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. "We cannot fight this weapon," he said, his voice low, measured, but carrying the weight of absolute truth. Other generals shifted uncomfortably. Some clung stubbornly to honor, to tradition, to the idea that surrender was betrayal. Others, more pragmatic, whispered that Japan had no choice. The atomic bomb had rendered conventional defenses meaningless. Lieutenant General Yoshijiro Umezu, chief of the Army General Staff, argued for continued resistance. We have survived battles we could never have imagined. We can endure more. Our soldiers are brave, our people resilient. We cannot surrender. His voice quivered with passion, but beneath it lay fear. A recognition that their strategies, their courage, their very culture, were now insufficient against a force they could neither see nor fully understand. In another room, scientific advisors attempted to explain the weapon. It is not ordinary explosives, one physicist said, pointing to diagrams of nuclear fission. This releases energy on a scale we cannot match with conventional artillery or aircraft. A single bomb equals thousands of tons of TNT. It is unstoppable. Murmurs filled the room. The generals trained for war with swords, guns and strategy now confronted the incomprehensible. Their enemy had created a weapon that could erase entire cities at a distance, with no warning, no army, no front line. Outside the city of Tokyo lived in anxious anticipation. Citizens whispered rumors of Hiroshima, of a city wiped clean. Families clutched each other in fear, unsure if their turn would come next. Children asked questions their parents could not answer. Mothers hid in corners with trembling infants. Fathers paced their homes, feeling powerless for the first time in their lives. The atomic bomb had turned fear into a tangible, unavoidable presence. In the palace, the discussion grew more urgent. Some generals insisted on immediate action, bombing American cities, mobilizing every remaining kamikaze pilot, continuing the war regardless of the cost. Others argued that Japan could not withstand another strike. Even if the Americans dropped only one more bomb, no city could survive. Casualty estimates for Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagasaki began to circulate in whispered calculations. The numbers were staggering, hundreds of thousands of lives, reduced to ashen moments. Meanwhile, inside Hiroshima, survivors faced a new dawn of horror. The fires had burned through the night, smoke lingering in the streets like a permanent shadow. People who had survived the initial blast began to succumb to radiation sickness, their bodies weak and trembling, skin blistered and hair falling out in clumps. The human cost of the bomb was becoming painfully clear, and news from the city slowly reached the rest of Japan, filling the population with terror and despair. In Tokyo, the high command faced an agonizing decision. Every officer understood the stakes. Surrender could save millions of lives, but it would come at the cost of national pride and centuries of tradition. To continue the war would be to gamble with annihilation, risking not just the army but the entire nation. The choice was unprecedented: survival or honor, pragmatism or defiance, life for centuries of ideology. August 8th arrived with grim certainty. Intelligence officers reported that the United States had aircraft prepared for further strikes. The shadow of another atomic bomb hung over the nation. The emperor, usually a figure of distant authority, pressed his advisors for guidance. "What is the situation?" he asked, his voice calm but carrying an unspoken dread. The generals, faced with evidence of Hiroshima's destruction and reports of additional bombs ready to be deployed, struggled to respond. Words faltered. Ramps were silent. Strategy manuals seemed useless. Meanwhile, American forces prepared for a second strike. The pilots of the B-29 boxcar received final briefings on Nagasaki, unaware of how desperately the Japanese high command grappled with surrender. Every calculation, every route, every drop point was meticulously planned. The United States, having unleashed the bomb once, now held the power to demonstrate it again, further proving the might and technological superiority that had already shaken the world. Back in Hiroshima, the human stories continued to unfold. Families who had lost everything clung to each other in the ruins. Survivors wandered aimlessly, seeking loved ones, food, or water. The city was a landscape of fire, ash, and broken dreams. Those who had survived the initial flash faced a slow, invisible enemy in radiation, knowing that death could come days or weeks later. Fear, sorrow, and disbelief filled the air, a chilling echo of the power the Americans had demonstrated. In Tokyo, the High Command remained divided. Meetings stretched for hours, voices rising and falling in heated debate. Some officers argued that surrender would dishonor the nation, while others whispered that to resist further was suicidal. The weight of every human life, every city, every future generation pressed on their shoulders. They were confronted with a weapon that no strategy, no bravery, no honor could overcome. And then a realization began to settle over the leaders. Japan's enemies no longer fought within the conventional rules of warfare. America's atomic bomb was not just a weapon, it was a statement, a proof that the balance of power had shifted permanently. To resist further would not be courage. It would be a march into certain death. To surrender would save lives, yet challenge the very core of centuries-old honor and tradition. As the night of August 8th deepened, the Japanese High Command reached a fragile consensus. Surrender discussions, previously unthinkable, now became unavoidable. The horrors of Hiroshima, the threat of another bomb, the staggering human cost, all demanded that they consider a path that would protect the people. Even if it meant sacrificing pride, the decision would be agonizing, the consequences permanent. But the reality was clear. The atomic bomb had changed the course of history, and Japan could no longer fight a war on its own terms. In the homes and streets across the nation, citizens waited, unsure of what the next day would bring. Families huddled together, children asked questions they could not comprehend, and fear gripped hearts in a way that no conventional battle had ever done. The atomic bomb had done more than destroy a city. It had shattered the illusion of safety, of control, and of human power itself. The dawn of August 9th loomed as a shadow over the nation. The United States was prepared to demonstrate its power once more. And Japan, now confronting the impossible, stood at the precipice of surrender, facing a weapon, a nation, and a future they could barely understand. August 9th, 1945. Nagasaki woke under a sky that seemed calm, deceptively serene, as if the world had held its breath overnight. Families went about their routines, unaware that the same blinding terror that had struck Hiroshima was about to descend upon them. Children played in courtyards. Merchants opened their shops. Soldiers patrolled streets, their minds preoccupied with the dwindling hope that the war might somehow end. Above, the B-29 bomber boxcar approached, carrying a weapon of unimaginable force. Inside, Major Charles Sweeney and his crew checked their instruments, mentally rehearsing the drop. Unlike conventional bombs, this one carried not only explosive power but the ability to obliterate everything in its path, leaving survivors scarred both physically and psychologically. In Tokyo, the Japanese High Command had spent the previous day grappling with the possibility of surrender. The destruction of Hiroshima had already shattered the illusion of Japan's invincibility, yet pride in the codes of honor prevented a swift decision. Now, with intelligence indicating another atomic bomb ready to strike, the reality became undeniable. Resistance could no longer protect the nation, nor its people. On the ground in Nagasaki, life continued with ordinary rhythm. Father Kajiro, a local shopkeeper, was helping his children prepare for school. Across the city, factory workers moved between buildings, unaware that their workplaces would soon vanish. The first moments of the explosion would be instantaneous and total, a force no human could prepare for. At 11:02 a.m., the bomb detonated above Nagasaki. A blinding light erupted in the sky, brighter than the sun, consuming everything in a sphere of fire and heat. The shockwave tore through the city, collapsing buildings, incinerating streets, and sending debris flying like deadly rain. Thousands of lives were snatched away in an instant. Fires erupted across the city, merging into a relentless firestorm. Families, friends, and neighbors were lost, leaving only ashes and echoes. Father Kajiro shielded his children as best he could, but the heat was overwhelming. The streets he had known his entire life were gone, replaced by rubble, fire, and despair. Survivors stumbled blindly through smoke and flames, clutching loved ones, desperately seeking anyone who had survived. Those who lived through the blast would later speak of a silence so profound that it drowned out even their own screams. Thousands of miles away, the High Command in Tokyo received reports. The destruction of Nagasaki confirmed their worst fears. The atomic bomb was not a fluke. It was repeatable, precise, and catastrophic. The generals, who had debated surrender and pride, now faced undeniable evidence that continued resistance would result in total annihilation. Emperor Hirohito, informed of both Hiroshima and Nagasaki, summoned his advisors. The room was tense. Each word carried the weight of the nation's survival. Discussions that had lasted hours stretched into the night. Every military officer, every advisor understood the simple, terrifying truth. Japan could not continue the war. There was no defense against a weapon that could erase cities, kill hundreds of thousands in moments, and strike again with absolute certainty. As the magnitude of the devastation sank in, the emotional toll was immense. Families mourned lost loved ones in the ruins of Nagasaki. Children wandered through streets filled with ash, searching for parents who no longer existed. Soldiers trained to fight found themselves powerless. Ordinary citizens who had believed they could endure another year of war now faced mortality in its rawest form. Fear, grief, and disbelief dominated the atmosphere. The High Command faced a final agonizing decision. Surrender had previously seemed dishonorable, a stain on the centuries of tradition and bravery that defined the empire. Now it was the only path that could preserve what remained of the nation and spare countless lives. To continue fighting would be to invite complete obliteration, to gamble with the survival of millions. In the early hours of August 10, 1945, a consensus emerged. Japan would surrender. The decision, though fraught with tension and sorrow, was unavoidable. Letters of surrender were drafted. Diplomats prepared for the formal announcement. The world was about to witness the end of a war that had raged for years. Yet the echoes of the atomic bomb would linger forever in the hearts of survivors and the conscience of nations. Meanwhile, in Nagasaki, the city began to reckon with its new reality. Fires still smoldered ash-covered streets, and survivors wandered aimlessly, searching for what had been lost. Stories emerged of miraculous escapes, people shielded by walls, underground shelters, or mere chance. Yet the overall devastation was complete. The atomic bomb had achieved what no army could, a swift, indiscriminate, and terrifying power that rendered conventional warfare meaningless. The Japanese High Command, facing the unavoidable, began preparations to communicate surrender to the Allies. The weight of centuries of pride pressed upon them. Yet they understood that humanity and survival had to take precedence. The atomic bomb had not only destroyed cities, it had shattered illusions of invincibility, forced the nation to confront reality, and rewritten the rules of warfare forever. Across the Pacific, American officers observed the aftermath with grim acknowledgement of their success. The bombs had done what countless soldiers and planners had long anticipated, forced Japan to surrender without a prolonged invasion. Yet even among the victors, there was recognition of the unprecedented human cost, the moral weight of unleashing a weapon that could wipe out entire populations in moments. By the evening of August 10th, Japan's surrender was inevitable. The atomic bomb had changed everything: the balance of power, the conduct of war, and the perception of human capability. Hiroshima and Nagasaki stood as monuments to both human ingenuity and human suffering, reminders that in the pursuit of power, consequences could be immeasurable. As the nation prepared for the official announcement, the citizens of Japan faced the reality of survival mixed with grief. Parents mourned children, siblings searched for each other, and survivors tried to comprehend what had happened. The atomic bomb had forced a nation to its knees, not through gradual conquest, but through instantaneous, unimaginable force. August 15, 1945. The air in Tokyo was heavy with anticipation, tension, and a sorrow that seemed to hang over the entire city. Inside the Imperial Palace, Emperor Hirohito prepared to address the nation. For centuries, the emperor had been a symbol of Japan's pride, tradition, and invincibility. Yet today he faced the unimaginable, announcing surrender to a foreign power, acknowledging the destruction wrought by a weapon the world had never seen. The broadcast began. Hirohito's voice, calm yet tinged with grief, echoed across radios and loudspeakers throughout the islands of Japan. Citizens huddled in homes and shelters listened in disbelief. Families who had survived Hiroshima and Nagasaki still in homes, streets, and refugee camps, reactions were immediate and profound. Tears streamed freely. Children clutched parents who could not answer their questions. Mothers prayed for the safety of surviving family members. Fathers, who had carried pride and fear in equal measure for years, bowed their heads in defeat. Soldiers who had trained for honor and valor realized that their courage, bravery, and loyalty had been rendered meaningless by the atomic bomb. Meanwhile, the Japanese High Command, once filled with uncertainty and conflict, felt the immense weight of their decision. Officers who had debated continuing resistance now faced the practical reality of communicating surrender to Allied forces. Diplomats worked tirelessly to ensure the announcement reached the United States and its allies, while generals prepared to guide remaining troops to comply. The human cost of resistance had been made painfully clear, and survival demanded acceptance. Across the Pacific, American military and political leaders received news of the surrender with a mixture of relief, awe, and solemn reflection. The atomic bombs had achieved what decades of conflict could not, forcing Japan to capitulate without a prolonged invasion. Yet even in victory, there was a recognition of the staggering human suffering the bombs had caused. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were reduced to ash and rubble, tens of thousands of lives extinguished in moments, and countless others facing a lifetime of suffering from radiation. In Hiroshima, survivors emerged from the ruins, faces blackened with ash, hands blistered, clothing shredded. They wandered through landscapes once familiar, now unrecognizable. People who had lost everything, homes, families, friends, tried to grasp the enormity of what had happened. Children who had witnessed the flash of light that annihilated their neighborhoods were now orphaned, clinging to strangers for comfort. Mothers and fathers searched endlessly for missing children, yet many would never be found. The city's silence was filled with grief, sorrow, and disbelief. Nagasaki's survivors faced similar horrors. Fires smoldered for days, the sky heavy with smoke, ash coating streets and bodies. People moved among the ruins, calling out for loved ones. Discovering neighbors and relatives turned to nothing. Soldiers trained to fight against armies were powerless against a force that required no strategy, no courage, only presence at the wrong moment. The human cost was staggering, yet amidst despair, stories of bravery, compassion, and survival began to emerge. People shielded each other, carried the wounded to safety, and performed small acts of humanity that defied the chaos around them. For the Japanese High Command and the nation, surrender was both a relief and a source of grief. Cities lay in ruins, lives extinguished, traditions challenged. Yet the decision preserved the remaining population, preventing total annihilation. It was a stark lesson in the unimaginable power the United States had demonstrated. America had not merely won a war, it had revealed a force that could redefine human conflict, challenge the very concept of military honor, and impose consequences that spanned generations. Globally, the surrender was historic. Governments, military leaders, and civilians around the world watched as Japan ended hostilities, bringing World War II to a close. The atomic bomb, a technological marvel with devastating human cost, became both a symbol of ultimate power and a warning of what humanity could unleash. The world had crossed a threshold, and the balance of power had shifted irreversibly. In the hearts of survivors, soldiers, and civilians, the aftermath of the bombs left an enduring impact. Trauma, grief, and fear mingled with relief that the war was over. Rebuilding would be slow, painful, and uncertain. Entire generations would carry the memory of those fateful days. the blinding light, the instant destruction, the loss of family and home. And yet life persisted. People began to pick through rubble to tend to the wounded, and to rebuild their shattered communities. For America, the events of Hiroshima and Nagasaki demonstrated the extraordinary reach of innovation, determination, and industrial power. It was proof that a single nation could, in moments, reshape the course of history, challenge the mightiest empires, and impose consequences on a scale previously unimaginable. The atomic bomb was more than a weapon. It was a mirror, showing the full extent of human ingenuity, and the profound responsibility that came with it. As the sun set on August 15, 1945, Japan, the United States, and the entire world entered a new era. The war was over, but the echoes of Hiroshima and Nagasaki would never fade. The human stories, the grief, courage, survival, and resilience remained vivid. Reminders of the unprecedented power humanity had unleashed and the lasting consequences that would shape generations to come.